You're in a forest with a few friends. The sun is setting, casting a hazy golden glow through the trees above that contrasts with the greenery around you. You think nothing of the rustling canopies, the crunch of dried leaves in the distance. It's hard to tell whether the far-off laughter is coming from your friends or something else, something far more sinister. You've always been curious by nature, and something inside of you wants to investigate the laughter. Maybe one of your friends is playing a trick on you, so you decide to investigate. You wander deeper into the forest, far past what you thought your friends might have gone. Yet, ominous laughter still lingers. The sound of scuttling feet surround you as you continue. You're not scared per se. The laughter doesn't really sound malicious. Your steps take you towards the source, and it drives you deeper and deeper into the trees. Despite your search being futile, with each passing second, the laughter turns into soft hums and melodic singing. It's mesmerizing, and you feel as if you could be here, now, forever, playing with these unknown things. All of a sudden, silence breaks. You are now alone. Your sense of direction is completely lost. You try to find your way back home through the forest. It takes time, but surely enough, you find a path. Arriving home, you're greeted by cries of relief from your family. Stressed embrace of their arms. It's hard to breathe. Surely you were only gone for a few hours. Why is it that everyone's overreacting? Your mother looks you in the eye and asks a haunting question. Where have you been for the past 2 weeks?
Welcome back to the campfire. In this episode, we will be exploring creatures of mayhem and mischief that dwell in forests. Later, we will be exploring strange phenomena in Latin America. But for now, allow me to take you somewhere far more pastoral, but just as rural. Like I mentioned in the episode covering the origins of fairies and fairy myth in Ireland, the word fairy is an umbrella term which refers to almost any mythological monster or creature in Irish folklore. My prime example in that video was, while often thought of as more a ghost, the banshee is a fairy. Another such one is the púca, a mischievous spirit with the power to shift its shape into both animals and humans. They're known to cause terror and delight in creating experiences that leave people walking away confused or horrified, almost as though they feed on the lingering emotions still processing in the minds of those that encounter them. Recorded in March of 1938, the púca of Killian is one example of this. It was said to inhabit the hills above the County Donegal towns of Killian and Meenagran. At night, it would enlarge itself and make, quote, a most horrible noise. The noise would travel down the hills and into the valleys surrounding the townships, terrifying the citizens. For the time in which it was active, nobody left their homes after dark, and cattle were brought in from grazing an hour before sunset. To resolve the incident, an aging priest rode up the hill to meet with the púca. Taking courage, the priest entreated with the creature and asked it why it was so invigorated to cause harm to the people in the valleys below, to which the púca replied, "I was a man of the world once, and I can get no rest in the next one." The púca then told the old man what the reason for this was, and of that matter the priest never spoke, going to the grave with the knowledge of what caused this in the púca. After being heard out by the priest, who was notably unafraid, the púca left and was never seen nor heard from again. The revelation that something kept the púca from passing into the next world is especially disturbing if you've listened to my introductory episode on fairies, as you know exactly what world that is. Even more distressing is the priest's refusal to speak on it, leading one to wonder if it was deemed by him to be unholy to repeat. This story is unusual in another way that seems to imply that the púca took a material form similar to a human, if not larger. This is fairly uncommon for stories of them, as they normally have a strict preference for animal forms, such as that of a goat, horse, or donkey. Whatever animal it chooses to inhabit, a púca is denoted by its thick black coat and red eyes, often portrayed as shining with a mesmerizing light. It is also said that they are not perfect at imitating human forms, often bearing traits of animals in some way. A púca trying to lure someone in with the form of a beautiful woman may outstretch her arms to reveal feathers, or a handsome showman's mustache may turn out to be an otter's whiskers. Stories of the púca are just as varied in their audacity. The story of the Killing and Mina Gran Púca is untypically dark, as the púca usually prefers to be a force of pure mischief with little physical or emotional harm done once the prank has come to pass. Possibly for that reason, many tales involve a person who has been on the drink, and once the púca bewitches them, they leave feeling rueful and used. They are also inherently rural beings, not seen in urban areas such as towns, though they make their presence felt there, like the root of the woods creeping into city streets. You can imagine the terror a púca encounter could cause. There you are, in a pub, cozy, enjoying a nice meal with your friends before having a few drinks in the warmth. When you leave, you head into the abyssal void of 1930s Ireland's night. If you're lucky, you'll have the pale glass moon beaming overhead, and if not, the stars are your only natural illumination as you head for the hills to go home. The cold finds every possible weakness in your clothing to attack you for the entire walk, and it has begun to rain. From the corner of your eye, you spot it. 2 red beads moving steadily towards you, as if floating, not walking. In the County Cork town of Fermoy, a farmer had one such encounter, sometime in the 1800s. On one chilly night, on the way back from his horse stables, he turned to find a horse behind him, except this horse was not his. It was black in coat, with 2 gleaming red eyes. No sooner than did he have a chance to examine it, it drove its head under him and slung him upon its back, then took off running. It bounded over ditches and hedges like a bat out of hell. The story at this point compares it to the Shi Guiha, the fairy wind. The night itself was torrentially wet and horribly windy, but that did not stop this púca. For roughly 5 miles the farmer clung on for dear life before with one swift gallop the púca threw him off and into a bog hole, a sort of draining area naturally created for water. Imagine it as a giant mud pit that is flooded. They can be incredibly difficult to get out of, and in times of organised crime in Ireland, they were sometimes used to dispose of corpses that may bring unwanted attention. After clambering himself out, he began a disenchanted walk home through the howling storm. Having learned his lesson, the next night, the man returned from his stables, though he had made a change to his get-up by wearing riding boots, no doubt an exquisitely expensive piece of kit at the time. It is important to remember that in the 1800s, Ireland is far from a prosperous place. To go out and buy riding boots, which are also seen more typically as an English thing to do in a time in which Englishness was not looked upon very fondly at all, particularly in rural communities, is a very bold choice, both fiscally and culturally. Like a skulking phantom, the púca appeared in the horse form once more and threw him on before he could react. Once set upon the back of the púca, it began to run, and he deployed his countermeasures. He dug in the pointed, cold iron spur into the ribs of the púca. Cold iron is a type of ironsmithing that involves cooling the metal at a lower temperature. This was thought to be a more natural manner of smithing, and thus more effective against the original people of Ireland, those who would later become the fairies. Cold iron is fascinating enough to justify its own episode, but that will do for the purpose of this story. Recoiling in pain and letting out a whinny of horror, the púca landed the farmer flat on his back upon the ground. The fairy horse took off into the inky blackness, and the farmer returned home with a grin. The following night, it visited him in the stables and spoke to him in Irish. "Are you wearing those sharp things at all tonight?" Afterwards, the man said nothing for a moment, and then they shared a few parting words. As it happened, the púca regarded his ingenuity with laughter, and they departed each other as friends. It would seem he viewed the cold iron rebuttal in good humour, and he no longer bothered the farmer in Fermoy. Phenomena like the púca are not solely found in Ireland. While many stories about the púca boast a unique sense of Irishness, there are eerily familiar tales from all around the globe. For example, in Latin America, there is a force of nature that, while initially similar, truly has no equal.
My name's Leonel Justen. Lived in Mexico for about 9 years of my life, growing up there, pretty much. I spent a lot of time in many different places in Mexico. I spent a couple years in Guerrero, a few more years in Veracruz as well. And I've heard and seen a lot of stories from both places. So growing up in Mexico, there are a lot of like folk tales and stories. I feel like Mexico in general is very spiritual in a sense. A lot of the people over there are religious. We're all Catholics over there. It's very hard to find any other like people that are into any other religions. And with that, I feel like it ties into a lot with spiritual things such as ghosts, and other kind of cryptids. One of the biggest cryptids in Mexico being the duendes. Growing up in Mexico as a kid, I lived in a lot of surrounding spots where it was heavy forested areas, like pine tree forested or rainforests. And always, whenever I was growing up, hanging around my friends or family, whenever we would go off into the forest to play or just to hang out and everything, we were always told to be very careful and be vigilant of duendes and everything. At the time, I really didn't know what they were or why people like were so scared of them. But whenever I was out playing with my friends and we would hear a rustling in the leaves further away, or laughing, or what we thought would be a voice in the distance, my friends would always be extremely scared and very eager to go back home because they were scared of attracting or luring or getting lured from duendes. So I mostly found out about them just from playing with my friends, hearing it from my friends' perspectives, and then questioning my father about it later on. And as I questioned my father about it later on, he would tell me some of their known traits, sometimes how they are extremely territorial whenever it comes to mountains and forested areas, usually sometimes making rock mounds or little wreaths out of pine needles and that kind of stuff. And as a kid, whenever you come across a little rock mound or a little wreath, your first instinct is to go look at it or disassemble it or maybe knock it down. But it's really interesting because whenever I was out with my friends and I would see these certain things and I would be going after it to kind of like knock it down or mess it up in any way, shape, or form, my friends would always stop me and be like, no, don't touch that. You don't know who or what made that. And that would always question me. I would always kind of be like, what, like, why? It's just a little pile of rocks, like in the shape of like a house or like stacked up on each other like a totem pole. For me, I never really understood what the fear was behind it, but for them, this was something so ingrained in their culture and something that they've been told stories of ever since they were a little kid to stay weary of, because they didn't want to upset these creatures, these entities, these beings, the duendes, because in the mountain ranges or in the forests, they would kind of like craft these little things to kind of show where their territory begins, or what spot of land or stretch of land typically belongs to them. And it's told in stories from their fathers or from their family that if you knock them down, it'll upset them, and they can usually get mad at you. And whenever the duendes get mad, they can either like send a curse on you and your family for like bad harvest or bad crops, or even maybe take one of you off into the forest, never to be seen from by your family ever again. So I feel like whenever talking to the townsfolk and them being brought up, whether it's from like people from little shops or people from my family, but yes, the townsfolk, asking them about it, whether it be people from stores or my own family or my friend's family, they would always speak about them very, very shyly, almost as if they didn't want to talk about them at all, almost as if saying their name or saying their word would manifest them into reality. They would always tell us stories about how they would take children away and how they would take them for long stretches of times, and how their fascination with children in general and taking them because of their innocence. I think that's another big thing to kind of like show light on, is that duendes are a form of, I think they're a form of creature where they act very similar to kids. They're very carefree. They're fairies of the forest, if anything. They love to play. They love to dance. They love to sing, and anything that kind of mimics these similar behaviors, such as children, they're cool with, usually. So that being said, whenever kids would go off into the forests and they would see or interact with these children that are so carefree, free of guilt, free of anything really from the real world problems, they would kind of gravitate towards them and want to interact with them more. Usually my dad would always tell me stories about how he grew up and how they would always tell him whenever going off into the forest, if he ever were to encounter something like a duende or hear laughing or scuffling in the distance, how he was actually supposed to blurt out bad words to kind of ward them away. So kind of giving it like the grounded reality of the harshness of humanity to kind of ward away these things from not wanting to interact with them. And I remember one of my dad's stories is that he would go out late at night with his friends, and they would just kind of be playing, and if they heard anything out in the forest, kind of like giggling, laughter, or scuffling in the leaves, that they would all start shouting bad words to kind of ward off these duendes. But I remember specifically in one story, my father said whenever they all did that, they heard growling and gnawing as if, and sometimes even screeching, to kind of like them saying those bad words almost infuriated them and made them more hostile as they would run back to like their families to tell them about like the incidents. And one of the most interesting incidents from my dad's side was involving his cousin, whose name is Cesar. So Cesar is very interesting because he's the one person in our family who's struggled, or from my dad's side of the family, that struggled with mental difficulties. He never was able to make it through school. I don't believe he's able to read or write or do anything kind of like that. But it's really interesting because he was the main person in the family who had numerous encounters with duendes. And growing up, he didn't show any mental difficulties. He was a normal child going to normal school, learning at a normal rate. But every single time that he would go out with his friends or into the woods, he would always be led astray by these duendes. He would always pursue the laughter in the distance or want to know what the scuffling in the leaves was, finding these rock mounds or finding these wreaths around the forest and kind of continuing on to kind of venture and figure out what it is. And the more he would venture out, the more time he would be lost for, sometimes hours, days, weeks, months even. And every single time that he would go missing for larger periods of time. And it was really interesting because every single time they found him, he had no idea how long he has been away from his family for. Like he would come back home after a couple weeks and his family would be like, do you have any idea how long you were out there for? Like, we were worried sick. We had the entire townspeople looking for you. And he would only recall it as him being out and away for about 2 hours, maybe like half a day, but never that long of a period of time. And since he continuously embarked on those journeys of trying to pursue or even playing with them, because he even specified that they showed themselves to him, and the way that he would describe them is they were little cherub beings, like naked kind of baby angel things that were extremely well versed in traveling through the forests, leaping from tree to tree, extremely fast, energetic. He would even say that they had pointed teeth and elf shaped like ears, that kind of stuff. And every single time he would get captured by them, not captured by them, but taken away from them, he would come home and it was almost like he would lose a piece of himself, as if he would lose a piece of his mind, and he would never fully develop and mature like the other kids around his time. He wouldn't say bad words. He was always very carefree and childlike. the older, his friends got and the more mature things they started doing, he continued to want to just play and have fun and play hide and go seek or tag with his friends. While people mature, as we grow up, kids start doing different things, we start hanging out, we start going to arcades and everything, but he never lost that childhood wonder. And I feel like a lot of people that also have those experiences within the town, those people that have like those mental difficulties, have also had those ongoing encounters with duendes. Because I feel like there's two kind of there's two different ways they could go about it. It's either the child continues to seek the duendes and continues to go out there and continues to kind of try and pursue them because they feel as if they're friends with them, or you have the child interaction where they come home and they're scared and their family limits their outside time, and they now know that if they ever hear or get like persuade or hear like these this laughter in the distance, or what's it called, humming or singing, that they're supposed to just say bad words, throw stones, and then come home immediately and not spend any more time out there. But yeah, those are a few of those encounters.
So, the duende is a very interesting creature because it has many different iterations within Latin American culture. Latin America is such a large landmass. We're talking about Spain, all of South America, and a good portion of North America. But the duende is not similar through all these different countries. When we talk about the duende from Spain, that duende has much more in common with the European legends that are very close by in France and Ireland. Duendes in Spain are seen more as nymphs. A lot of the origins come from the Germanic invaders that arrived near the end of the Roman Empire. And most of the iterations in Spain of the duende is a simple mischievous spirit that like to live in abandoned houses. They don't do much beyond causing trouble for the occasional wanderer, playing pranks. They're very benign in nature. Once we arrive in Latin America, however, a lot of the duendes that we hear about become intertwined with the beliefs of the local Native Americans that lived there. Of course, the Spanish, during their colonial conquests, tried to integrate their culture and their folklore into the natives. So what ends up happening is you get this long tapestry of duende folklore stretching from the mountains of Mexico all the way to the Andes in Peru. And every part that you visit has a different rendition of the duende. A good example of the radical differences between duendes would be the aforementioned Castilian duende as compared to the duendes of the Andes in Peru. In Peru, the duende is much more aggressive. Spanish chroniclers record that the natives believed that the duendes in the Andes were much more similar in nature to succubi. They were called huarcalas, and they're believed to inhabit sacred alder trees within the mountains. These trees are considered sacred to the natives, and they were believed to manifest through voices that were generated with great fervor. The people considered these trees to be spirits that must be worshipped and protected. It's also said that priestesses would be consecrated to the service of the forest spirits. These duendes played a dual role within the native society. Sometimes they could be seen as hostile or negative, especially when you look at it from the point of view of the Spanish. But many of the locals saw them more as part of the world. They weren't inherently evil, they were simply there and had always been there. Now, when we move on to the folklore of Mexico and the American Southwest, that's where the duendes become more similar to what the Spanish belief was. A lot of the duendes within Mexico were seen as the aforementioned mischievous Castilian ones, but they were a tad more hands-on with the way they behaved. A lot of Mexicans grew up believing that duendes would clip their toenails, and would, if you're unlucky, they'd actually take the entire toe. It was why they practice hygiene tactics like cutting your toenails, because there's always this fear that Duende would come and snip it for you if you weren't careful. But in that context, the Duende goes from being this spirit, as it's seen more so in South America, to being this kind of vagabond character that only inhabits uninhabited parts of the country. A lot of the folklore around the Duende also describes them as these gnomish type creatures. They are very small, they are very agile, and they, generally speaking, don't interact with people and are rarely seen by people. The last part to mention would be the Duendes of the Philippines. Now, those Duendes are much more aggressive, and they're seen much more aggressive spiritually by the people of the Philippines. The people believe that the unvisited dark parts of a house or anthills would always carry a spirit of a duende. They were seen as old men, and they could actually be considered good or evil based upon the color that you saw them in. White was associated with good, while black was associated with evil. And it's often said that those people would interact with duendes, and what would happen then would then dictate what would happen to them, whether it be a good or a bad spirit. It was seen as taboo to offend one of these spirits, and it was also believed that if you angered a duende, it would pretty much confer misfortune upon your house. Another place worth mentioning the legend of the Duende that also comes from one of the former Spanish colonies would be the Philippines. While the Philippines aren't generally considered to be part of the Latin American culture world, they also have strikingly similar tales surrounding duendes. The Chamorro people in the Marianas, which is adjacent to the Philippines, talk about a spirit called the Tatomona. This spirit is believed to be, to some people, a good spirit and believed to be a bad spirit. Some of them see them as helpful or shy creatures, while others of them believed to be mischievous, and they eat misbehaving children. When we arrive in the Philippines itself, duendes are believed to once again inhabit places that are not normally tread by people. They enjoy to hide within rocks and caves, old trees, or the darker parts of the home, in anthills and termite mounds. They believe duendes are classified between two separate castes. The first caste would be the good caste. These are identified with the color white. These spirits are helpful, and they often look over children and they assist the household, versus the black ones, who are often said to be evil in nature. These are the mischievous ones. They are the ones that enjoy to pull pranks, and they enjoy to cause mischief within the house. Offending one of these spirits is a deep taboo to the Filipino people, and people are believed to be cursed by duendes when they anger the spirits.
Thank you for joining me again by the campfire. When visiting friends in Texas not so long ago, a long conversation between them and I, comparing duendes to fairies, led me to embarking on this very show you're listening to right now. The intertwining and commonalities, even in our nightmares and demons, have the power to foster connections across borders, across oceans, and across time. Don't visit forests after dark. Do not follow the laughter. If you hear wind chimes, turn around and run in the opposite direction. And if you spot two red orbs approaching you, reach for iron, and then pick a god and pray that it was forged cold.